Yeah, so we started a new chapter, Samich Gimel. Talked about the issue of you can read it when you're walking, sitting, standing. We talked about that. Then we talked about the issue of lying down, right? That you have to be on your side. Yeah. So let's read what it says in the Torah a little bit. So it says, Rambam Zakatab. So the Rambam says, Ben Shepanav Lemala, whether his face is above, in other words, he's lying down, facing up, or Panav Tachot Bekarka, or it's facing down, Loikra, you shouldn't read it this way, the Rambam says. Even though it's not really on his back, a little bit tilted, Loikra, you shouldn't read like that. Because it looks like you're doing it like in a arrogant way. So it says, shamen or barbasar. So it says, but if he's like, fat, or, like very large, right? He's a football player, right? The big guy. So if that's the case, so he's not able to get on his side, or because of some other, let's say he's sick, whatever, right? So then he can just tilt a little bit. So in other words, you see from the Rambam, facing up and facing down is no good, right? And also a little bit tilted is no good. So really, what we want is you should be on your side. This is the proper way to do when you're lying down. Just like they say, right? The doctors, they say that it's more healthy to sleep on your side than to sleep on your back or your stomach, right? The Rambam says that too, as we mentioned. Rambam says best to sleep on your side, more healthy. So that's where we are here. Let's go to Bet Yosef. Okay, so Bet Yosef brings the source here, the Per Kama de Brachot. It's in the first parak of Brachot, Yud Amud Bet, Tanan. It says there in the Mishnah, Bet Shammai Omrim, says Bet Shammai, Ba'erev, how do you read the Shema in the evening? Kol Adam Yatu Ve'ikru. So he says you should like incline, right, whatever, and read like that on your side, in other words, whatever. V'boker Yamdu. And in the morning, he says you should read it standing. That's according to Bet Shammai, right? Shenimar, as it says in the pasuk, right? When you lie down, when you get up. But Bet Hillel says, Kol Adam Korin Kedarkan. Each person reads according to his way. Shenimar, as it says, when you're going on your road, if so, then why was it said when you're lying down and getting up? We're talking about the time that a person goes to sleep, and also when he gets up. Rashi explains, right, in their way, or bekima or beshkiva, whether you're standing or lying down or b'yeshiva or sitting, or me'alech or walking, right? V'tanan, and we learned in the Mishnah too. Amar Rabbi Tarfon, it says Rabbi Tarfon, Ani haiti baba derech. So it says Rabbi Tarfon a story like this. It says he was going on the road. So he says, I reclined to read like the words of Bet Shammai. So he says what happened was that he was attacked by some robbers, whatever, when he did this. So the rabbis, noticed, right, that Why was he attacked? Because he did something wrong. If there's no sin, right? Why are you being punished for what? For what did you? What do you think? Right? They finally they jumped on him and they said, it says, "Amrulo kedai haita lechov be'atzmecha ve'shavat al divrei bet Hillel." So they told him, they said, you know why you got attacked by the robbers? Because you didn't do like Bet Hillel, you did like Bet Shammai. Shame on you, right? So what does that mean? The halacha is like Bet Hillel, so you're not allowed to do like Bet Shammai, right? That's so they told him, well, what are you doing? Okay. This whole discussion, by the way, why the halacha is like Bet Hillel and not Bet Shammai, I'm not going to get into it now. This is not the time for that, I guess. But anyway, right? In general, the halacha is like Bet Hillel. Okay, good. So goes on with Yosef. Umash katav chutz frakdon. So he said, except the person who's lying down right on his back, we don't want that. Memrad Rav Yosef beresh perek sheni di brachot. It's Rav Yosef said this in the second perek of brachot. Uperesh Rashi. So Rashi explains, shochev al gabo ufanav lemala. That means that he's lying down on his back and his face is pointing upwards. So the Rambam seems whether his face is facing up or facing down, nikra prakdon, he's still called prakdan. So what does that mean? It's forbidden either way, right? Whether you're this way or the other way. By the way, the Gemara also says, right, about this, that a person shouldn't sleep on his stomach or sleep on his back. It's not good for several reasons, right? So not only you shouldn't do Shema that way, you also shouldn't sleep that way either. But the Shema is even worse, right? Because you're doing something holy, so it's even worse. Okay. Then it goes on, Umash katav afilu eno mamash al gabav lamuti al tzido. That which Rambam said, that even if he's not really on his back, a little bit tilted, but still it's a problem on his side. Lo ikra, he shouldn't read that way. But if he's like a big guy, or a fat guy, whatever, right? Then he can do it because he can't. He has a hard time, flipping to his side, right? So it goes on. Uprakdan. So here it is, right? Here's the story that the Gemara asks, right? You're telling me that he shouldn't say Kriyat Shema when he's on his back. What? So it's allowed to sleep like that? Is that what you're trying to imply? The Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi look what it says, right? But Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, he curses somebody who sleeps like that. Right? Aparkid. Right, there you go. Right, so you sleep on your back, you get a curse. Amre migna ki matzle shapir dame. Avagav de matzle nami asu. So they answered, right, this question. Migna ki matzle shapir dami. So it says if he's sleeping the way he's praying, it's okay. We'll see what that means. I'm not really sure exactly what he's trying to say there. Right? Shapir dami mikre. Afagav den matzle nami asur. Even though praying like that is also forbidden. Rabbi Yochanan matzle v'kare. But Rabbi Yochanan did read it that way. Shani Rabbi Yochanan de bal basar. So the Gemara answers. Right, Rabbi Yochanan was different. Why? Because he was a big guy, right? He was a football player. In other words, he was a giant. He had a big body, husky guy, right? Husky. Okay, good. So now we're going to explain, right, what all these words mean. It brings Rashi here to explain, right, so we can understand better. So first of all, Rashi explains the word migna, right? This is Aramaic, right? So Rashi says lishon, right, to sleep. That's what it means. Migna. Ki matzle shapir dame, right? So what does that mean? Rashi says, when he's tilted on his side, it's okay. But it says when it comes to Kriyat Shema, even that's not allowed. Because he's accepting the yoke of heaven. He's doing it in a way, arrogant way. It says in this perek, it says over there in Chavdal Amud Aleph, that if two people were sleeping in a talit, in one talit, one turns the other one way and reads the Kriyat Shema, and the other one turns the other way and reads the Shema. Katav Rabbeinu Yonah, says Rabbeinu Yonah, so he says, we learn from this Gemara, how do we say they can turn around and say Shema? How, right? But he's on his side, lying down. Because we said, right? So it says there, right, that you're not allowed to do that, to read Kriyat Shema like that. Now which we said, you love Amud Aleph, Matin v'korin, that you can tilt yourself and read. What is that talking about? It's talking about when you're sitting. But when you're tilting, when you're lying, lo amru, they didn't say that. So then how do we say over here the shara that it's allowed? Because there are those who say that when that when we say he can read, even though he's tilted, asur is that's only tilting. Like he's like lying on his back. He's lying on his back. He's a little bit tilted, right? A little bit. But the one who's tilted on his side altogether, right? So he says that's allowed. But he says it's even better to answer like this. Since we see that there's a lot of exertion regarding this, it's allowed. Like we said, Rabbi Yochanan used to read like that on the side. Because he was a husky guy. So it was very hard for him to do that. So therefore, here also, they allowed him to do it when he's tilted, because it's hard for him. So what does that mean? Since he already took off his clothes, right? He's already undressed. Now to get back and get dressed again, right? That's hard. Not easy to get dressed again. So in those days, they had to get dressed. You know why? Because they weren't wearing pajamas. They were sleeping naked. You know what I mean? And also they weren't wearing underwear. Because if you're wearing underwear, you can read it. It's no problem. That's the truth. So, right, therefore, in those days, right, it was hard for them to do that. They had to get dressed. But Rambam says, everybody reads the same in their own way. Whether they're standing or walking, or lying down, or riding on a horse, whatever, on some animal. But he says you're not allowed to read Kriyat Shema when you're lying on your stomach, right? Facing down. Or mushlach al gabo, or you're lying on your back. And your face is facing up. But on your side, you're allowed to read it, right? But it's as if he was a husky guy, right? Fat guy, whatever. He's really husky, very husky. So therefore, he can't really, turn around. Not easy for him. Can't tilt. Or let's say he was sick, like we talked about last week, right? About after the surgery, before the surgery, whatever it was. So then he can just tilt a little bit to the side, and read it. So it seems like he wants to say that when we say that he reads say that he can read, even though that he's tilted, asur, asur, haynu beprakdan. That's when he's like not tilted all the way. Hamuteh me'at, he's a little bit tilted. But if he's all the way tilted to the side, right, 90 degrees, whatever you want to call it, right? He's got a right angle there going on, right, with the bed, the right angle. Okay, 90 degrees, right? So then, right, mutar, it's allowed. You're allowed to read the Shema. Like this opinion that we mentioned. Like it was written in Talmidei Rabbi Yonah. Rashi also seems like Rashi like that. Right? So bottom line is also he says the Rabbeinu seems to pass in that way. So bottom line is like this, right? Before we see the Shulchan Aruch, just to sum it up, as we said, right, you can read it when you're sitting, standing, right, walking, okay, and so when you're lying down, that's the only question, right? So when you're lying down, as we said, if you're facing up or down, you shouldn't read it like that, disrespectful. But if you're tilted on your side altogether, then you're good, right? But if you're a big guy, right, husky guy, you can't tilt your body so easily, right? So then you can even tilt a little bit, and that's good enough. Not all the way. Okay, good. Let's see the Shulchan Aruch. All right. Okay, so says Shulchan Aruch. Korata me'alech or med, as we said, you can read it when you're walking or you're standing, shochev, sitting, rochev, or riding on the animal even, right? Riding on your horse, on your donkey, on your camel, whatever it may be, right? Agab behema or yoshev, or even sitting, aval lo prakdan, right? But not prakdan, which means that you're face down or face up. דהיינו שפניו פתוחות בקרקע ומושטח על גבו גבונה ולמעלה. אבל קורה והוא שוכב על צידו. But if you're tilted on your side, right, as we said, you got a 90-degree angle there, right angle, you're good. That's okay. So says the Rama, הגה מאחר שכבר שוכב ויקטיר לעמוד. So he explains, right, what's the reason why we allow you to do that? Because it's hard to get up once you're already in bed, get dressed again, this, that, right? It's not so easy. That's why we allow you to do that. So it's as if he was a husky guy, he's not, he can't tilt on the side. Or let's say he was sick, right? So then we allow him even to tilt a little bit, right? Slightly. And that's good enough. We let him pass. Okay, very good. Any questions? If you have any questions, let me know. Unless we're going to go on. Okay, good. Let's go to bed. Let's see the tour. So says the tour, Katav Rav Amram, right? Says Rav Amram, Misha רוצה להחמיר לעמוד כשהוא יושב לקרותה מעומד לא יעוט עביד. Look what he says, right? The person who wants to stand to say Kriyat Shema, if he was sitting, it's not proper to do that. Veikra avaryana. So he's called a sinner, he says. But you have to object against him. You have to rebuke him. Shemitzvata miyoshev. He says, why? Because the mitzvah has to be sitting. Why would you want to stand? What's the point of standing? What do you think? This is the Amidah? What do you want to stand for? He says, however, if he reads it, he says, however, if he reads it when he's walking, for the first pasuk, he has to, stop. Because as we said, right, the first pasuk is from the Torah, so you have to have concentration there, So therefore, you stop, say Shema Israel, and then you continue walking. Last week we talked about the issue of saying the Amidah when you're sitting, right? All this stuff. You guys remember all that, right? When you're on the plane or whatever, you're in the car, all these things.
Yeah.
So, there's a story about this, by the way. They say, there was in the Rambam's life, there were several periods, that he went through. So when he was young, he was supported by his uncle, who was a rich guy, So he was just sitting and learning all day. You know what I mean? Lucky you, right? But then what happened was that when his uncle passed away, he lost his income, so he had to go on to work. That's why he worked as a doctor. He had no choice. So he went and worked, got a job. And by the way, the story goes. If you guys are familiar with this, right? That the Rambam writes in his books in several places, a couple of places, right? That Talmid Chacham, should be working also. That it's not good that he should be sitting and learning all day. Right? So the truth is, the halacha is not like that. But, right, but it seems like he got caught up in his own words. You know what I mean? In other words, what he actually paskin happened to him. You know what I mean? So he had to go to work, And so, what happened was that basically, apparently, right, until he had to go to work, the Rambam already was a master of the Torah at that point. You know what I mean? He already knew the whole Torah inside out. That's the way it seems, So what's the story? The story is, that they say that there was this, guy from some other country, sends the Rambam a letter, some young fellow. He tells the Rambam, he says, Rabbi, he says, I want to come and be your disciple, I want to come and study with you. Can I come? Join you over there? Right? So he said, he says, you want to come and study with me, huh? So he says, looks like it's not going to work out for you. So he tells him, he says, what my schedule is now? So I'm working 2 jobs. I'm moonlighting, you know what I mean? I got 2 jobs going. In the morning, I'm working for the king, for the Sultan of Egypt. And then in the evening, I have my private practice, So he says, I don't have any time to learn all day. I don't learn. He says, the only time I have time to learn now is on Shabbat. Can you imagine the Rambam? This is how he lived his life when he was a doctor, So it looks like Mina Shamayim, they explained to him, looks like what you wrote over there about the rabbis working, it wasn't such a good idea, maybe. They taught him his lesson there. You know what I mean? So he told this guy, he says, what am I going to teach you? He says, all I do is work all day. So he says, what he told him? Listen to this now. He told him, he says, I don't even have time to eat meals in the morning. He says, I don't get a chance to taste something until the afternoon. I'm starving all morning. I don't even have time to eat breakfast. So he says, tells him, he says, not only that, he says, where I pray, right? Guess where the Rambam was praying in those times? You want to know? You may think it was going to the big synagogue, right? And praying over there, big shot rabbi, sitting in the synagogue, right? Like a king. No, he wasn't. You may think he was praying at home, right? Even that he wasn't doing. So guess where he was praying? No, come on. Anybody can guess?
On top of the donkey.
Exactly. When he was riding on the donkey, going to work, in his BMW donkey, right? That's when he was praying.
He would fall asleep with the donkey too, no, Kabbalah?
I don't know. But this is what he was doing. This was his synagogue. You know what the synagogue was? The back of his donkey.
Rabbi, is that why it's predicted that the Mashiach will come on a donkey?
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. I like that. Are you sure it doesn't say the BMW?
No, I heard on a donkey.
Okay, maybe it's a
On a white-
BMW donkey.
On a white
Anyway,
donkey.
right? I'm joking. But anyway,
No, I wasn't joking. It's not one of my.
yeah, no, it's actually true. It's very true what you're saying. I'm not. Believe me, I'm not trying to deny it.
Yeah, I don't know if the girls knew about that, but I wasn't trying to be funny.
By the way, it says in Zohar Kadosh. You know, what's the symbol of the Mashiach coming on a donkey? You know what it is?
The Rambam symbol that the Rambam was
Right, but
praying
what's
on
the
a donkey.
symbol? Why should he be sitting on donkey? Why not in a limousine, right? In the like the president has. You know, what's that car called? The Cadillac that he uses, right? What's that called? The car?
I don't know, but the answer to that one I don't know. But I'm assuming that it's taking him this long because he's on a donkey.
He's going very slowly, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I got it. Okay, so what do you call it? So says the Zohar Kadosh, the symbol of the donkey is like this, that the donkey is like an impure animal, it's a symbol of impurity.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like the ultimate in earthliness, very earthly animal. So therefore Mashiach is riding on it, which means that he's going to defeat the forces of earthliness in this world, the forces of evil, which is described by he's riding on, he's ruling over it. He's going to rule over all the forces of earthliness in this world, right? That's what it means, right? Okay. Anyway, that's a different discussion. But anyway, the Rambam was praying on his donkey. That's where he was praying. Can you imagine? This was the big Rambam. The big rabbi. You see how things are, right, in life. You never know how things are going to come. So and sometimes be careful what you ask for, right? They say, you may get it. You want a full-time job? They may give you one. Then you're going to be sorry. Okay, whatever, right? So that's the idea. So anyway, right? Why do I tell you this? Because you see from there that a person can pray when if he has no choice, he can pray when he's riding on his donkey. What else can he do? Even the Amidah, which is supposed to be the standing prayer, right? He's praying on a donkey. He's not even standing. How did he do that? You know why? Because he didn't have time to stop. He had to get to work. Otherwise, he'd be late. You understand? So he couldn't get off the donkey and stop, whatever. There was some reason for it. So this is the story. There's also other reasons. They say it could be dangerous. If you get off and you stop, right? You may be, accosted by some bandits, some robbers, whatever. God knows. That's why it's not good to stop. Yeah. So.
Do you think he'll make it to Forest Hills, or I'll have to meet him on Avenue Z somewhere?
It says in the Zohar Kadosh, when Mashiach comes, he's going to appear, where? In the Galilee, right? Which is the north of Israel. Why is that? What's the reason why? So it says in the Zohar Kadosh, the reason why he'll appear in the Galilee, not in Crown Heights, by the way. Sorry to tell you, he's not going to be there. I don't think he's going to have any business over there. Right? So in the Galilee, he's going to appear. Why? Because that's where the exile started, from there. So therefore, the redemption will also start from there. Galilee. That's the whole story. Okay, anyway, right? Interesting discussion. But getting back to reality, so that's what it is, right? So a person can say Kriyat Shema, right, while he's riding on his donkey, as we said, right? No problem. So that's what the rabbi is saying here, like, what makes you think that you have to stand up when you have to say Kriyat Shema? If you're sitting, stay sitting.
I have one more. Since we're talking about sitting, or standing? Let's see if you guys can figure this out. What does a lady do? Sitting down, a man standing up, and a dog with one of its legs raised.
Oh boy, I don't know.
Shake hands, of course.
I got it. Okay, so you have to explain that one to me later on. Okay, so anyway, right, as we said, אם קורא מהלך צריך לעמוד בפסק ראשון, בא להלכות גדולות, so it says, הלכות גדולות says, כתב שצריך לעמוד עד על לבביך. He says, you gotta stand until על לבביך. כך כתב הרב"ד, that's what it says on the רב"ד, בעיקר מקום הכוונה הוא פסוק ראשון. But he says, anyway, right, the halacha is that the most important thing is the first verse. Right? Therefore, he says, אם אחר שקרא פסוק ראשון. So therefore, once he read the first pasuk, Nirdam, he fell asleep, right? As you said, right? He fell asleep on his donkey, right? ולא יכול לקרות בכוונה, and he's not able to read anymore, right? He's very drowsy, so he can't read with concentration. Yatsa, הקורא Shema, he fulfills obligation like that. That's what he says. Okay, very good. So let's see the with Yosef here. Says Bet Yosef, Tamon Mishum. So it says the reason of Amram Mishum de'im beyom hu over al divrei Beit Hillel. Because if you're doing this during the daytime, you're transgressing in the words of Bet Hillel. Why? Because Bet Hillel says you can read it anyway, sitting, standing, right? Why would you want to stand? When you show Bet Shammai, so it looks like he's doing like Bet Shammai. That's the whole thing. When he does that, instead of sitting, he wants to stand. Shamar b'boker yamdu, because it says right in Bet Shammai, in the morning you should stand. V'im balayla hu af k'divrei Bet Shammai lo asa. So if it's at night, we're talking about even like Bet Shammai didn't do, because Bet Shammai says you should do it when you're lying down. So therefore, this is the reason why Rav Amram says don't do it this way, right? In other words, if you're sitting, don't just stand up and say the Shema. For what? What did you stand up for? Right, then he goes on. Oh, so now, right, the question is, why is he called a sinner? Right? Rav Amram said the guy's called a sinner because he got up. Why would you call a sinner? So says Bet Yosef, that's what we said in Shabbat, Mem Amud Aleph, Man de Avar ad Rabbanan Shara lemikre Avarina. Why? Look at this, right? There you go. Right, this is a very big thing here. Look what he says. It says in Shabbat, Mem Amud Aleph, a person who transgresses the words of the rabbis, it's allowed to call him a sinner. You're allowed to call him a sinner, even though he's only transgressing the words of the rabbis, not from the Torah. He's still called a sinner. And he goes on, and that which Rav Amram said, right? The mitzvah is to read it when you're sitting. It means like this. He says, it seems to me, the mitzvah is also to sit, right? You don't have to be standing. Like Bet Shammai says, then in the daytime you should be standing like Bet Shammai. So we don't pass like Bet Shammai, so that's it. So don't be a hero and start doing like Bet Shammai. Right? Otherwise you get into trouble, as we said, right? You're a sinner. You don't want to do like Bet Hillel. Why? Halacha is like Bet Hillel. Mitzvata velo me'omed. What is we saying here? Yeah, okay. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch. So, and by the way, this is just a good general rule, and just remember this general rule, okay, that I teach you, that don't make up your own rules in halakha, you know what I mean? Like what you think is the right thing to do. Don't do that. Do what the rabbis tell you. I mean, don't think you can outsmart everybody. You know, I know how to do it. I know. I have my special way. You don't have nothing special. Humble yourself and do what the rabbis tell you. This is what the Torah is all about. Being a humble person, you know? Do like the halacha says. That's all you need. Don't add to it, don't subtract from it. Just do what it says. That's all. Very simple. So says Shulchan Aruch, מי שרוצה להחמיר, לעמוד כשהוא יושב, בכותב מעומד, נקרא עבריין. Look what it says, right? If a person wants to be machmir and stand, right, when he's sitting for Kriyat Shema, he's called a sinner. Right? Why is he called a sinner? Because he's being stringent like Bet Shammai. You don't want that. Like that rabbi said, right? Rabbi Tarfon in the Talmud. He said he did like Bet Shammai and he got attacked by thieves. They told him, you know why you got attacked? Because you did like Bet Shammai. Why did you do like Bet Shammai? Halacha is like Bet Hillel. Okay, very good. So that also shows you, by the way, you know, good proper conduct, you know, which is that don't try to be like different than anybody else, you know, just do it like everybody else does. Like, you know, like, oh, you got to be different, you know. Yeah, no, I do it differently. Why you do it differently? Why your Shulchan Aruch is not good for you? What why do you have to be different than everybody else? Who gave you these ideas in your head? You know, not good to be like that. You want to be different, you know, and you want to be original, and this comes from arrogance, you know, gava, arrogant, you know, attitude, you know. Yeah, I want to be more religious than everybody else. I want to be more holy than everybody else. Why? For what? What? Who told you these things? What? This comes from the Yetzer Hara, you know, most of the time. It comes from the evil inclination. Not a good idea. Don't be a hero. Okay, good, very good. Let's go on. So then it says like this, right? As we said, right? Rav Amram says that if he is reading it when he's walking, he has to stop for the first verse, right? Because there it's from the Torah. He needs concentration there. So it says Bet Yosef regarding that, En lefaresh tekai lemay de samichle. So this is what it means to say. Even though regarding a person who wants to stand when he's sitting, we already said, right, that's not good. Lo yahutabit, he's not doing it properly. Mikom it says, nevertheless, im koreh me'alech, but if he's reading it when he's walking, he has to stand for the first pasuk. He has to stop. The la'amod deresha hu la'apuke meyoshev v'hai la'amod eno ela la'apuke me'alech kemo sheitbarer b'siyata dishmaya. So he says this la'amod to stand means that when you're walking. Ela nir'eh, so it seems the resha kai that's talking on the first case shekatav shkore ota me'alech is reading it when he's walking. Mishum ha'ach, says because of that. Nevertheless, he has to stand for the first pasuk. But he says, according to that which I explained, that the mitzvah is also when you're sitting. Also, when you're sitting, it could be that it's going on whatever is next to it. It says. That's talking about the case where it says there, right, that the mitzvah is while you're standing or sitting. Doesn't make any difference. She's the man law, whichever case, right, whichever situation comes to is your predicament at that time. Whatever predicament you may be. In other words, if you're standing, you're standing. If you're sitting, you're sitting. No reason to change your posture. You can stay the way you are, no reason. Okay, so then he says, בכל עניין שהזדמן לו, אינו יכול להרשות משום דהכי כתב במי הוא אם קורא מהלך צריך לעמוד. But it says, nevertheless, though, if he is walking, he has to stop, as we said, right? That's the idea. That's what he meant to say, this rabbi. Okay, good. Then he goes on, so now he says, right, why do you have to stop when you're walking? It's over there written in the Gemara, Yugim Amud Bet. Amar Rav Natan bar Mor Ukva. This rabbi says, Amar Rav Yuda ad al levavecha be'amida. Until al levavecha you have to be standing. Mikan ve'lach lo. From here onward, you don't have to be standing. Rabbi Yochanan says, no. Kol parsha kula b'amida. He says, no, everything you have to be standing. V'katvu Arif ve'arosh, Yerushalmi mefaresh, that the Rif and the Rosh said, and Yerushalmi explains, lo, she'im haya yoshev omed. If he was standing, he can get up. Not that he should standing, he should get up. What he means is that if he was walking, he should stand and stop. Mashma, Rashi, that's what it implies from Rashi. That's what's in Tosfot. He says, they said that even though Bet Hillel says, that each person can read in his own way, where he says it is the most proper thing to stand. What does that mean when he's walking, right? Stop. Because he's not concentrating so well when he's walking, he's a little bit confused. He's looking where he's going, right? He's a little bit distracted by that. So he can't really concentrate so well when he's walking, like when he's standing. It's not the same thing. Katav Arif, says the Rif, so says the Rif, the halacha is not like any of these rabbis. The Kaiman halacha kirava, because the halacha is like Rabbi says, the Hava Bata, because he was the final rabbi there in the Talmud. The Pasak halacha Rabbi Meir, he passed like Rabbi Meir. The law, what does that mean? The law tzarich kavanah ela pasuk rishon. You only need kavanah, you only need concentration in the first pasuk. Bilvad. Hilkach says, therefore, en tzarich la'amod ela b'pasuk rishon. So therefore, you only have to stand. What does that mean? Stop in the first pasuk. Bilvad. V'chen pasak Rama. That's where Rama paskins. V'chen pasku Tosfot. Also Tosfot like that. V'katu dehachi ita betanchuma. They said that also Tanchuma is like written like that. Tanchuma is a midrash. Okay, good. So then he goes on. Ubiyai gavna ubahag katab. Bahag says halachot gedolot. So tzarich la'amod ad lebavecha. You have to stand until ad lebavecha. V'chen katav Rabad. So it says in Rabad. Achar shekatav Rosh Tivri Arif. After the Rosh wrote the words of the Rif, Katav Ravad, he wrote, and the Ravad Katav, he wrote Mishum Gaon, the name of the Gaon, the Mehalech Tzarich La'amod Ad Al Levavecha. The person who's walking has to stop until Al Levavecha. K'de'amina Perek Kama De'yoma. Like it says in the first Perek of Yoma, Yutet Amud Bet, the Perek Rishon En Lo Lirmoz Be'enav. So it says because in the first Perek he shouldn't do any signs with his eyes, right? That's what it says also on the Rif. The Kaman, the Asur Lirmoz Bechol Perek. You're not allowed to do signing, any sign, right? Allusions to your friend, right? In the first Perek, Mishum Dechashib Kriyat Arai, because it's considered to be occasional reading, whatever you want to call it. V'chen nami tzarich amida. It says also you need to stand, stop. Mishum deloch lichshiv kriyat arai. They shouldn't be like considered to be like by the way, reading by the way. V'hat delo by amida b'chol parsha, and that which we don't require to stop for the whole parsha. Mishum the pasuk, because the first pasuk he says the batre. Afterwards, ketivu uvlechtecha b'derech. It says you're going on the road. Omer. The Koreh b'malech, that means you can read it when you're walking. In other words, you're reading that, so you can read it walking, and you don't have to stop. Why do you have to stop? It says you can walk. So therefore, right, you're contradicting yourself by stopping for the whole first paragraph. There will be a self-contradiction there. So says Maran, Bit Yosef, since the Rif and the Rambam and the Tosfot agreed, then you only have to stop for the first pasuk. That's how we paskin. That's halacha. And then he goes on a little bit more. The main place of the kavanah, the concentration, is the first pasuk. We'll explain this, right? Okay, very good. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch here in Daled. Also for Gimel, right? We're giving Gimel. So if he was going on the road, he wants to read Kriyat Shema, he has to stop for the first pasuk. Right? That's Gimel. The first pasuk, he's got to stop. Then let's go to Daled. Ikar Kavanah, so it says Shulchan Aruch in Daled, the main concentration, pasuk Rishon, is going to be the first verse. Hilkach says, therefore, im karav lo kiven libo, if he read it and he didn't concentrate, pasuk Rishon, on the first pasuk, he didn't concentrate on the first pasuk. So he says, lo yatzai dechola, he didn't fulfill his obligation. Therefore, he has to read it again. So if you couldn't concentrate on the first pasuk, you got to do it again. So then he goes on to say, this is a very important concept here, even according to one who says mitzvot that mitzvot don't require intention, but here he admits that he does require. So what does that mean? That we paskin that the mitzvot require intention, but there's another opinion that says mitzvot don't require intention. But he says, even the one who says that doesn't require intention, here he admits that you have to do it. Why is that? Because here it's not a matter of intention. It's a matter of concentration on the first verse. That's something else, right? It's a different kind of a mitzvah. Intention is one thing, concentration is something else. Any questions on that?
Kabbalah Harav, I'm sorry, can you explain the difference between intention and concentration, since you said
good. Let's focus on that, right? Let's focus on that issue right now.
Thank you.
Intention means that every mitzvah, before you do it, you have to think about what you're doing, which mitzvah you're doing. That's called intention. Now we call that lishma, right? That you have to do it for the sake of heaven, right? In other words, I'm doing right mitzvah 221, right? Whatever it is, right? I'm doing the mitzvah of tefillin. You have to think about that. When you do tefillin, that's clear, right? But kavanah means something else. Kavanah means that I'm concentrating on what I'm saying in the first verse, right? The words that I'm saying, I have to concentrate on that. You understand the difference?
Yes, thank you.
They're two different things. So in general, most of the mitzvot require intention, right? To intend to do the mitzvah. But this mitzvah requires concentration also. The first pasuk. And also in the Amidah, right? We're going to get to that soon, Bezat Hashem. The Amidah also requires concentration. At least in the first blessing. So it's a very similar concept to this right here. Very similar. Except that the Amidah is from the rabbis, and this is from the Torah, so this is even heavier, right?
Kabbalah, so can I say, if this is, please correct me, if this is proper to say that I have kavanah on the intention, meaning I'm thinking about, I'm having the proper concentration to do it for the sake of heaven?
Yeah, in other words, for the sake of doing this mitzvah, right? That's what it means, for the sake of heaven. I'm doing mitzvah, right, number 19, right? Whatever it is, right? Whatever.
So this is two types of kavanah, no? Kavanah for intention and kavanah in the words, maybe, or no?
Yeah, two different things, right? So
Okay.
they're not both called, right? Um, one is like intention, one is like concentration.
Mhm.
Understand? Intention to do the mitzvah, concentration on the words, that's something else.
Okay. So, okay. Intention would be the heart, no?
I'm sorry?
The intention, the motive, no? The heart.
Yeah, it's not really, and I don't know, you can call it the heart if you want, but it's really what you're thinking, right? That's what it is.
Okay.
You're thinking to do the mitzvah, you know?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to somebody who does things like out of habit.
Okay. This
You
is
know what I mean? Like habituation, you know? We don't want habituation with mitzvot.
Okay.
We want you to concentrate on what you're doing.
Okay. So this is to break that pattern, yes?
But here,
Mhm.
we also require that you should know what you're saying. That's already a higher level, right?
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So that's Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so let's see how much time we got. We can do maybe one more. Let's see if we have time. Grab one more for the road. One more for the road. Right. So it says like this in the tour. So the tour said like this, right? That if he after he read the first verse, right, he fell asleep kind of, you know, like he dozed off. He fulfills the obligation because the rest of it doesn't require intent, as we said, right? Concentration doesn't require. Only the first pasuk. So regarding that, says Bet Yosef, Beresh Perek Haya Koreh. It's over there in this Gemara. Amar Shema Yisrael. If a person said Shema Yisrael, Adonai Echad v'ne'enas b'shina yatsa, and he fell asleep. Right, boom. He said the first pasuk, and he dozed off. Like that's my favorite pastime, right? Dozing off, right? So it happens to me all the time. I'm dozing off here and there, right? So what do you call it? So this can happen, right? It happens. But if you said the first pasuk, it's okay. Why? Because that's from the Torah, right? The rest is from the rabbis. So the rabbis say, you know what? If you're so tired, you can't read the whole thing. As long as you read the first pasuk, we forgive you, you know? We let you off the hook. If you're that tired. So, yeah. So it says, right, Amar le Rav Nachman, says Rav Nachman, Ledaru Avdeh, to his servant, right? To his, so he tells his servant like this, right? For the first pasuk, you know, like make sure I'm up, you know, like don't let me go to sleep, don't let me fall asleep. Right? But it says but it says for the rest of it, it's okay. If I fall asleep, don't wake me up. That's what he told his servant, right? So you see from there that's the halacha. That the first pasuk is very crucial. The rest of it, okay, you fall asleep. All right, you know, we'll let you slide. So, right, that's only, of course, you know, he can't stay up. But if he can't stay up, right, why would he shouldn't do that, right? Obviously, he shouldn't do that. That's clear. So, says the Rosh, that which it says that he fell asleep, that means he's like half asleep, you know, like drowsy, you know? So says the Rosh, you know what that means? He can read the rest of it, but he can't read it with concentration, you know? He doesn't know what he's saying. Right? Mikan ve'elach, from here and onwards. This is exactly what Rav Nachman said to his servant. The first pasuk bothered me. Make sure I concentrate. Right? That means to say that wake me up, you know, if I fall asleep. Until I can concentrate good. But he says more than that, the rest of it, don't bother me. In other words, let me just, you know, doze off. I'll say it while I'm dozing off. Even if I read it without concentration. right? Lo tetzaran lekitzeni, don't wake me up, he says. The milta the pshita hu he shetzarich likot kula. But he says it's so what does that mean? The Rosh says, well, don't think that they're trying to tell you here that you don't have to read the whole thing. You got to read the whole thing. It's just that the rest of it doesn't require concentration.
It's a good thing Joe Biden doesn't study the Torah.
It's so funny. Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay. So it says all these rabbis seem to agree, right? Rabbeinu Yonah, Rabbeinu Hai. Also, it says the Rambam Pek Bet had what about the Rambam? He brought the words Lashon Gemara. He brought the Gemara Kimin Hago like this custom. Then Bidvarav Hechrea, but it says it doesn't really show which opinion he goes like. Komakom, he says nevertheless Mimash Katav Achakach Shepek Haniskar. Now what you wrote afterwards in the same verse in the same chapter, that if he read it when he was dozing, Yatsa, he fulfills obligation. As long as he's awake for the first pasuk. That what you wrote in the beginning of the parak, also in the beginning of the chapter. So that means that the Rambam is also agreeing with the Rosh. That means that the first pasuk he has to be really up. The rest of it he can be dozing and reading. That what you wrote that from here onwards. If he fell asleep, we don't wake him up. It means to say we don't bother him to read it like totally awake, right? Totally alert. Even though he's reading it while he's like dozing, Yatzai fulls obligation. But he says if he didn't read the rest of it at all, but he didn't fulfill obligation, right? So there you go, right? At least according to the rabbis, right? Because as we said, the first part is from the Torah. So if you read the first pasuk, according to the Torah, you fulfilled your obligation. But the rabbis require you to do the rest of it as well. 3 paragraphs, right?
When you say the first pasuk, you're talking about just the first line, the Shema Yisrael.
Exactly, that's it. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Shulchan Aruch, if he was sleeping, right, he fell asleep. We wake him up until he reads the first pasuk, right? We want that to be with concentration. He's really up, right? Really alert. But it says from there and onwards, we don't bother him. In other words, he's dozing off, and reading like that. Because even if he read it, he's dozing, he fulfills obligation, even though he had no concentration there. So says the Rama, right? Haga, the din shatui v'shikor ayin lekama siman tzigtaz. So later on it says we're going to discuss the issue of a person who's drunk, right? What does he do? How does he read Kriyat Shema, right? What's the story there? Okay, so we'll get to that B'ezrat Hashem sooner or later. One of these days we'll get there. Probably after the holiday, you can be sure. Okay, B'ezrat Hashem. So anyway, I wish you, bless you with wealth, health, happiness. Chazak Baruch. Thanks for coming. See you tomorrow. Be holy and be happy. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
God bless.